Welcome to the Liberty Lobbyist, where we teach you political lessons from the purple state of New Hampshire so you can advocate for liberty no matter where you live. I'm Melissa Blasek. I'm a former New Hampshire state representative and the current executive director and lobbyist for a grassroots liberty organization called Rebuild NH. I have a really good show coming up today. We are going to be talking with Will Estrada of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, which is an awesome organization. We're going to talk all things legalities concerning homeschooling. But before we do that, I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into nerdy policy discussions, but I want to give you ideas that you could potentially be using in a state near you. These are just policies and legislation that I'll be working on and championing in the next legislative season here in New Hampshire. But they're ones that I think are universal and would work in most states. They're not really, kind of New Hampshire specific. You'll hear, we'll get into more of the education bills in more detail later with Will, but I'll kind of give you a little brief overview here. So my organization, Rebuild NH, we were originally founded as Reopen NH in April of 2020. I think we can all guess why. And so obviously our first issues when we were first created were state of emergency stuff, and then it became, ending COVID restrictions, reforming state of emergency laws. So what occurred during COVID could never happen again. And we evolved very quickly for obvious reasons when the vaccines came out to talking more about medical freedom and engaging a lot on medical freedom issues. And we've expanded, we're very into education freedom as well, and parental rights, even food freedom, reducing the power of the administrative state. I think we all learned that the administrative state truly is the real swamp. And we learned that very well during COVID. So those are kind of the main issues that we work on. Obviously, that's not everything. But let's talk about some of the bills that we're going to be working on here in New Hampshire next year. Our major push will be for our no mandates bill, which I've talked about on previous episodes of this show, ending all vaccine mandates. Most states don't currently have any vaccine mandates except for the mandates that we've always had for school attendance, like public school attendance. So this bill is to end all mandates. I firmly believe that it is immoral to mandate any kind of medical intervention, and that the proper role of public health is to educate people and persuade people that their ideas are right, not to force and coerce them. And so that's going to be our big push. Actually, going backwards in time here a little bit, we have a couple of bills that are currently retained, meaning they were bills from last year that are still being worked on and held in committee, but they're due out by the end of this year. They'll be coming to the floor in early January. And one of them is our food freedom bill. And it's essentially Thomas Massey's Prime Act, but just within state borders. That one's tough because federal law supersedes in some ways. We're trying to work around as much as possible. It should be interesting to see where that one goes. If you've been listening to the show, I am firmly against school-based health clinics. And if you don't know what a school-based health clinic is, New Hampshire was actually the last state in the country to enact school-based health clinics. The idea of them isn't brand new in that in very, very poor, sometimes very, very rural communities throughout the country, there have been school-based health clinics in the past. And the idea is that, it's easy access to healthcare. New Hampshire never had any, but they've really evolved. Now they're more about mental health, as well as physical health. And we're talking like, these are not, your school vaccine clinic of old. No, these are fully functional primary care and mental health clinics in the room next to your child's classroom. That big black box called the school that your child goes to every day where you're not present. They have doctors and psychologists not only treating them, but diagnosing them, um, prescribing drugs, and even doing minor surgeries. And every time I say that, the people are like, that's not true. And I'm like, well, they put in IUDs and depot shots. Like, what do you call like the birth control implants? What do you call that? That's minor surgery. And they are absolutely doing that in school. And by the way, because of federal law, you as the parent are not required to give permission for your child to have access to any birth control. So your child could be going off to a school that has a school-based health clinic and getting an IUD, and you don't even know about it, and you are not legally required to be notified about it. So we have a bill to say that in public schools in New Hampshire, there cannot be any prescribing or surgical capabilities. And I believe that what that will do is essentially cut off any financial gain of having school-based health clinics. Because understand, these are not doctors being hired by the school system. The school system partners with third-party hospital systems, and they actually are sort of like separate then legally as well. But they're not going to want to do this if they can't prescribe and if they can't do like things like birth control implants and that sort of thing, because that's where they get the cha-ching, 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 and they are not. There will be no reason for them to exist if they can't prescribe drugs. So that bill was retained. That's going to be coming to the floor soon. Going back to new legislative ideas that we're going to be introducing, we've been working on this bill for a long time. This problem has not been solved anywhere in the country as far as I can see. So children's medical records and electronic portal access, you do have the right via federal law to have access to your child's medical record. And when I say medical record, I mean the paper physical medical record. You can go to your doctor and say, I want my child's medical record. And what you will receive is the paper, hand redacted, for the things that are required after the age of 12 to be allowed without parental consent, which are birth control, as I mentioned previously, addiction services, and STD treatment. And those things are hand redacted out. They claim that they can't do that with a portal. So you'll notice if you have children who are over the age of 12 and they go to, especially any kind of major hospital system owned primary care, you lose access to your child's portal at the age of 12. Now, are you probably just going to help them set it up with their own email and whatever, and you'll have access and all that? Sure, absolutely. But it does make things very difficult, and it's ridiculous. It is absolutely absurd. So we had a bill saying, no, you can't do that. The parents need to have access to electronic medical records too until the age of 18. It unfortunately kind of they played political games with it in the Senate at the end of last year, and Christmas tree, meaning they added a whole bunch of other legislative priorities for the Senate onto it, and the House ended up not agreeing to it and killing it for that reason. But so I don't think it'll have any problem going through this year because everyone's already agreed to it essentially. So we're trying that one again. Youth Risk Behavior Survey. This is the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey. If you don't know what this is, go look up the questions. They start giving this to children as young as 11, I believe. And it's a wild survey. I read questions. I learned new things about self-harm that as a 36-year-old adult, I had never heard of. And I certainly do not want my child having it suggested to them or having them believe that, okay, I'm sad today and sad people do X, Y, Z. This survey is optional in every state, but in almost every state, I think, except for one, the parents have to know about that it's going to happen and actively opt their child out of it. We have a bill to say that you have to opt your child into it. Now, we had this bill, it already passed. It went to the governor's desk. The governor vetoed it. We're trying it again. The reason why she vetoed it is because having over 60% participation in eligible age groups of this survey means that all these like NGOs and, more importantly for my governor, public sector unions like like the police and fire and stuff like that, they get extra grant money from the federal government. And we're not even talking like it's a lot of money, but politicians always act that if they're going to lose 5 cents from the federal government, it's like the end of the world. So they don't think that they would get high enough participation rates if the survey becomes opt-in to get all their money. And I say, meh, cry me a river. We have a bill. We haven't done a state of emergency bill in a long time. We kind of got our state of emergency laws to what I thought were a fairly good place. But this is one that every state should be looking into. Saying in your election law statutes that no election law rules can be changed via emergency order. We certainly saw in the 2020 election, right? They changed all the election rules and it was all done via emergency order by governors for the most part. This says, no, governors can't just unilaterally decide that they're going to just throw all the rules out the window. I'm very excited about this bill. Actually, I'm going to come back to that. I don't know if you all saw, but the teachers union has announced that they're partnering with the World Economic Forum to start creating educational curriculum for public schools. Yes, indeed. The World Economic Forum might be creating your child's next curriculum. That doesn't sound like a great plan to me personally. Maybe I'm crazy. States have the ability to nullify anything, essentially, that they want to. What does that mean? That means that the state has the right to say that they will not enforce any federal law or implement anything that they don't want to implement as far as when it comes to what happens with government at the state and local level. So we have a bill saying that the state of New Hampshire will never implement any educational curriculum that was created in a partnership with the World Economic Forum. We've been having an issue when it comes to vaccine mandates, and this is not unique to New Hampshire. That's why I'm bringing it up. Currently, I would say that the one area of business that has the most amount of vaccine mandates in private industry, and I really put that in total quotes here, is healthcare. And yeah, healthcare is not really private. It's very much government regulated, but we'll say it's private for the sake of argument. And they are still very into their vaccine mandates. However, I don't know a single healthcare worker that has trouble getting a religious exemption honored to have a job at any healthcare facility in New Hampshire. But what I do see is that students who need to do clinical rotations for their education don't seem to be able to do that. For whatever reason, all the hospitals and clinical sites have decided that, well, not all, but most have decided that they don't do medical or religious exemptions. I don't even know what that means. It's federal law. They have to do it, but they are always saying it's too hard for them. They can't do it. I don't understand that when they also allow their employees. But anyway, after doing a lot of back and forth with the technical colleges and this and that, and the attorney general has been involved, I've just decided the legislature needs to step in. So because we can't be having a system here where only the sheep essentially are going to be trained to be the future of healthcare workers. That is very scary to me. We're basically weeding out any free thinkers. So we have a bill to say that the state is not going to make any Medicaid payouts to any healthcare facility that is not honoring and accommodating medical and religious exemptions for any vaccine mandate that they may have. And I think that that's a great way of kind of handling some of these situations. You got to get creative. A lot of talk has been done about digital ID. What a lot of people don't realize is that I think it's about half the states now. There is technically a digital ID in your state. And why do I know this? Because New Hampshire just implemented it. And it's not a digital ID in that, like, you can't, it's just your license that is on your phone. Okay. Now, at least the way New Hampshire enacted it, you can't even use that for driving. You can only use it to buy, like, to prove your age to buy alcohol and cigarettes, essentially. Okay. That's all you can actually use it for. So I'm not like terribly upset about it. It's not super easy to get. It's just, I don't know. I don't really see the point of it, but some people might find a convenience factor in it. And it's more than likely in your state already, and you may not even know about it. But I would like a little bit of proactive protection. So we have a bill put in saying that no digital ID can ever be required to be displayed for any reason. And I think that that's going to go down like no problem. Okay, so get some education stuff. We're going to get into a lot more detail about education with Will Estrada later, but we have a couple of bills. One I'm super excited about. It's a constitutional amendment that says that parents and legal guardians have the right to direct the education of their child. And I think that this will create a lot of safeguards in homeschooling, especially now that homeschooling is getting so popular. I'm always concerned about overregulation from government. So I think that having some proactive protection in place at the constitutional level is very important. So we have that. We also have a bill to completely deregulate homeschooling, which I'm very excited about as well. We don't have that many requirements in New Hampshire as of right now, but there are a couple little things, and this would just take those away. Those are some bills that I think are pretty universal to most states, and that you could bring to your legislators. This is the time, typically, folks. You probably most people don't realize this, but most states don't operate in such a manner where legislators can just file legislation whenever they want. There's usually very set time periods where they can actually file new legislation. So actually, New Hampshire's is already done for the year, but we were very early. But you more than likely in your state still have time to get to your state rep, your assemblyman, and say, hey, I see the necessity for a bill that does XYZ. They actually love constituent requests. And so I'm always trying to empower people. You can do this. You can go off and champion a bill, bring an idea, get it filed, and help usher it through. So um, before we bring on Will, just a quick little word here from our sponsor. Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain or stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a plump, hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Native Path Collagen, made with only types 1 and 3 collagen fibers, the two most important types that make up 90% of collagen in your body. Found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut, types 1 and 3 provide maximum benefits without the need for unnecessary fillers. Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety, which is super important for me. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything: coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. Its peptide formula makes it bioavailable, meaning it's absorbed more easily and mixes perfectly without clumping. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals. You can get 3 or 6 packs at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a trusted choice. Plus, they offer an 800 number for any questions about usage, recipes, ingredients, and you will speak to a real person ready to help. Join their private Facebook community to share success stories, recipes, and support each other on this journey called life. Visit getnativepath.com/dailyclout and start your transformation today. That is GETNATIVEPATH.com/DAILYCLOUT. Okay, we are going to bring on Will. Welcome to the Liberty Lobbyist, Will Estrada. Thank you for joining me.
Melissa, it's so good to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you are with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and I had my parents were members of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I, like yourself, am now a second generation homeschooler. And I am always curious because, we seem to be about the same age. And I joke now that I was homeschooled back in the stone age of homeschooling.
I say the same thing, actually.
Do you? So tell me, what led your parents to homeschooling? Because I can tell you it was not something that my parents ever really thought that they were going to do with their lives. And then it just sort of happened. What's your
Well, I
story?
think it's the same for my parents. My dad's Puerto Rican from the Bronx. My mom is Italian from Brooklyn, and they were hippies, actually. So I think homeschooling was the farthest from their minds. But then in the early 80s, when I was born, my mom gave up her career at IBM to stay home and to start raising me. My parents wanted to have a lot of kids. They ultimately had 8 kids. I'm the oldest of 8 children. And my dad was a public school teacher in the state of New York and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And around the time I was born, my parents converted. They were atheists and they came to a relationship with God. And they said, as part of that, we want to look at homeschooling because even back in the early 80s, there were issues in the public schools, particularly in upstate New York. And so what they liked, what they saw, they really liked, and began homeschooling me right when I was compulsory attendance age in New York, and really never looked back. So I've been one day in a public school. That was to take the PSAT in Pennsylvania. But myself, my 7 younger siblings, all of us were homeschooled K through 12, both in New York and Pennsylvania.
Wow. And obviously, when I got married and we were going to have kids, and I thought, okay, like 95% of us we were pretty sure we were going to homeschool. And then I became a state rep when my daughter was a year and a half. And that really solidified it for me that there was no way she was ever going to public school. It took me just being on the inside to be like, no, no, but I'm clear on this. We are definitely doing it. So tell us about Homeschool Legal Defense Association, what its mission is, what you do there.
Well, it's a great question, Melissa. HSLDA was founded in 1983, which actually is the same year I was born. So HSLDA and I are both 42 years old. And when HSLDA was founded, it was founded by two attorneys and homeschool dads, Mike Farris and Mike Smith, both from the West Coast. When HSLDA was founded, homeschooling was nothing like it is today. Parents were being arrested for homeschooling. It was not something that most people did. If you told someone you were homeschooling, they would either call the police or call the shrink on you because it was like, why would anyone homeschool their children? You can't do that. It's illegal. It's something that the pioneers did. Maybe, oh, yes, Abraham Lincoln was homeschooled, but we don't do that in modern America today. And those early pioneers, Melissa, were just really impressive people. Most of them were actually either hippies or fundamentalist Christians. So the hippies, they thought the public schools were actually too rigorous. Many of them remembered, the Vietnam era and recruiters coming to the public schools. And so they didn't like that. They were like, we're going to homeschool our kids. And then a lot of the fundamentalist Christians, they said even back then in the 70s and 80s, they didn't like the trajectory of the public schools. Of course, the 1960s, prayer, Bible reading taken out of the public schools. So there was starting to be, I think you would say the leading indicators of what we're seeing in much of public education across the country today. But that's the environment that HSLDA was founded in. It was primarily legal and legislative work right off the bat. And around that same time, because of the work of HSLDA, because of the work of other legal attorneys and legal foundations, most notably ACLJ, Jay Sekulow, the Rutherford Institute, Whitehead, for example, and others, state organizations, and then really just the grit and determination of those homeschool pioneers, for lack of a better term, states began to fall in line. They would go back to Supreme Court precedent like Meyer versus Nebraska in 1923, which first the U.S. Supreme Court said that parental rights are a fundamental right. Then 1925, Pierce versus Society of Sisters, where actually private schools were being banned, and the private schools won those cases. And those are the kind of first Supreme Court precedents that parents and lawyers at HSLDA and other organizations relied upon. And by 1996, the last state to criminalize homeschooling, that was Michigan, had gotten in line, and homeschooling was legal in all 50 states.
Wow. How did you get involved with HSLDA?
So my parents joined HSLDA right off the bat, 1988, when they began homeschooling me. My extended family, my relatives, grandparents were actually very hostile to homeschooling, and so my parents were
Same.
very worried. Yeah, did you have the same situation, Melissa?
Oh yes, and I had aunts that were like, ex public school teachers, and they used to quiz me every time you were at any kind of family. They would like corner me, and yeah.
I still remember my grandparents, this is my Italian grandparents, their next door neighbor. I was 8 years old, and she had been a public school teacher. And I went over and she started grilling me. She handed me this book. It was called More Days and Deeds. It's sort of like, kind of short stories, had Aesop's Fables, had, stories of America, our founding. And she very suspiciously handed it to me and said, I want to see if you can read it. And I was kind of a weird kid. I loved reading. I was reading chapter books at 4. And so I just read it. And she was so overwhelmed. She said, you can have this book. And I still read it to my kids today. But I still remember that. Another funny story about this, everyone was so hostile to homeschooling. But then when I graduated from high school, I had been, received admission letters from Princeton. I did very well in my high school years. They all said, "Oh, we always knew homeschooling would be great." And my mom kind of was like, "I remember when I thought you were going to call Child Protective Services on me." But right in 1988, my parents said, we're going to join HSLDA. So right from the very beginning, they were members of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And I remember getting the Court Report magazine, and I would read these stories about these homeschool lawyers. And my dad, even though he was a public school teacher, he had always wanted to be a lawyer. And one of his regrets in life was that he had never gone to law school. And so he really wanted me to be a lawyer. And you read kind of these stories about like Mozart and other people, their parents trying to push them into some career and them really rebelling against it. It wasn't that for me. I wanted from an early age to be a lawyer. And furthermore, I wanted to work at Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So I remember 9 years old saying my dream in life is to be a lawyer and work at HSLDA. And I'm living the dream right now. It's really amazing. So we
I
would
love
read
that.
those magazines, we'd read those stories. When I was 21, I got a job. I was still in law school at the time. I started law school early and got a job as a paralegal at HSLDA. That was in 2004, and kind of worked my way through the ranks. When I finished law school, became an attorney, did the federal lobbying for 12 years. Then kind of thought my career was going in a different direction. I got hired in 2018 to be a career civil servant. Some would call me a bureaucrat at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in the Office for Civil Rights, and did that through the last 2 years of the first Trump administration, and then the first year of the Biden administration. And then really I got bored. I loved what I was doing, but you're really a cog in the machine, especially in health and human services, in the federal bureaucracies. And so left the federal government, really cushy government job, but left it and came back into the nonprofit world and back to Homeschool Legal Defense.
Oh, I love that you lived your dreams. It's so funny. I told my parents that when I was 7 that I was going to go to Berklee College of Music, and I did it, and I became a musician, and I did all of that. And I hear that story all the time from homeschoolers, and I think it is that they have the freedom to be so self-directed, and they do often end up achieving some of those childhood goals that they really had the time to explore and fully understand and fully realize. So it's not that unusual of a story, but I love to hear it. So yes, you touched a little bit on it before. It's actually wild to me when I think about when homeschooling was legalized. I'm here in New Hampshire. It wasn't really legalized in its current form until 1990. I started being homeschooled in 1998. And before that, you had to show, educational hardship to be able to homeschool. But in the scope of human history, there was actually a very brief period of time between compulsory public education and the legalization of homeschool. And yet we act like it was this massive period of time, which I can never quite wrap my head around, actually, and how quickly from the time of beginning of compulsory education that we went to everyone there are no other options. You're crazy if you don't do this thing that is frankly fairly new in the course of human events. But let me kind of go back to, so yes, your original fights were probably legalizing homeschooling. I'm sure parents were being harassed by the government, but things have changed quite a bit. What are some of your legal battles today compared to the 80s, 90s era?
So I'm so glad you mentioned the kind of blip of history and everything, because last year I'm a history nerd. I wrote a law review article. It's called Homeschooling in the United States, a Seismic Parental Rights Victory. It was published by Liberty University Law Review in spring of 2024. And I actually went through the history of first parental rights, which is the foundation on which homeschooling stands. And I went through the ancient Jewish scriptures, the Christian scriptures, the Islamic scriptures, the Quran. Then I went through the Greek philosophers. Then I went through the English common law philosophers. And then, of course, the US Supreme Court, and really laid out exactly that almost every great world religion and the Greek philosophers, who, of course, were not monotheistic, they were polytheistic. And then the English common law philosophers and up to modern times have really respected that parental rights are the term is pre-political, that they came first, that then government came out of it. It's what our founders said in the Declaration of Independence, that we are endowed by our creator with certain inalienable rights. They don't come from the government. I think it was actually our senator here in Virginia, Tim Kaine, recently said, "Oh, our rights come from government, and you're like the Taliban if you say they come from God." And it was so goofy for him to say that, because our founders said that we are endowed by our creator, not government, with these inalienable rights. And then when you look at our own country, homeschooling was the default, and it was really 1900 industrialization that you really began to see the push for compulsory public schools, and then the challenges we've had with the battles for private school freedom and then homeschool freedom. So I love that ode to history that you mentioned. The battles that we have today are different from 1983, 1994. That was the Leeper decision, which legalized homeschooling in Texas. And then, of course, People versus DeYoung, which was the case that legalized homeschooling in Michigan. And that was the last time that there were parents facing prison. Now, in 2008, there was a major court case about homeschooling. That was the In re Jonathan L. case that came out of California, where the California appellate court had said, nobody homeschools, it's illegal. And there was such a big outcry. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was the governor of California at the time, that the court, on its own motion, this hardly ever happens, actually withdrew their opinion and said, you know what, we want to get more amicus briefs. We want to have oral arguments about this. Our president, he was our director of litigation at the time, but our president now, Jim Mason, actually argued that case. And then the court actually unanimously said we were wrong. Homeschooling is legal in California, and that was 2008. So that was the last time we've ever had to be in court actually discussing the legality of homeschooling. So 2006 was parents facing prison. Last time that was that. 2008 was the last time actually courts were wrestling with is homeschooling legal. Mm-hmm. Today, it's a little bit different. There's kind of two tiers of cases that were in court, and then there's also legislation. And you, as having served in the legislature, you know that firsthand. So the first tier of cases that we have are discrimination cases. We have had to engage in litigation in several states. Most recently was New Jersey, to ensure that homeschool graduates are not discriminated against simply because their parents were the ones who issued the high school diploma. And the worst offender on this is not Harvard, it's not Princeton, it's not colleges and universities. It's cosmetology schools that you can get into Harvard, you can get into Princeton, you can get into Berkeley, but homeschool graduates cannot get into cosmetology schools. And we actually sued the New Jersey Cosmetology Licensing Board. We were able to get our homeschool graduates in, but now we're facing other issues. It was actually a settlement. They let our homeschool graduates in. We thought it was all set. And now more graduates are having issues, so we're preparing to file a lawsuit again. We've also had to legislatively work on discrimination issues. I drafted the legislation, which actually President Obama signed into law in 2012, ensuring that homeschool graduates could enlist in the U.S. Armed Services and not be treated as a high school dropout simply because they had that parent-issued homeschool high school diploma. And we're still working on a lot of those discrimination issues. So that's kind of the first tier. The second tier are cases of where the government officials, usually school districts, are saying, okay, we agree that homeschooling is legal, but we're going to make homeschoolers jump through extra hoops. Pennsylvania has one of the most highly regulated states when it comes to homeschooling. There are actually 4 states: Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, and Pennsylvania. Those are the 4 most highly regulated states when it comes to homeschooling. In Pennsylvania, the statute is about 8 pages long. And although homeschoolers have a lot of regulations, school districts also have a lot of regulation of what they have to follow. And one school district, this was the Eastern Lancaster County School District, they said, well, we are going to require a copy of every single parent's high school diploma if they want to homeschool. Pennsylvania requires that parents have a high school diploma. You actually have to swear under penalty of perjury that you have a high school diploma and then turn in that affidavit to the school district. But the school district was saying you also have to give us copies of that high school diploma, which is not in the statute. And so we said no, so long as the family says penalty of perjury that they have that, unless you have evidence that they're lying, no, you can't come and demand it. School district said, we don't care. And they actually sent social workers and school district officials at 8 o'clock in the morning on the 9/11 anniversary just a couple of weeks ago to families' homes. One family actually got a letter saying, we will charge you with truancy if you don't give us a copy of the high school diploma. And we said, enough is enough. The law is clear of what parents need to do, but the law is also clear of what school districts need to do. And so we filed a lawsuit, and we'll have more updates on that soon. Actually, it's we're waiting for the school district's response, and that is kind of the second tier of lawsuits of where we are fighting to uphold basically the rule of law. That if a statute says X, Y, and Z, parents have to do X, Y, and Z, but they don't have to then do A, B, and C. And we have numerous instances of school districts going above and beyond. That happened in Pennsylvania, Virginia a couple years ago, and we went to the Virginia Supreme Court, and the Virginia Supreme Court unanimously ruled in favor of our clients and slapped down the school district in Virginia and said, no, school districts do not have the authority to demand extra information simply because the school district wants to. Everyone is bound by the law of the homeschool statute, including the school districts. So those are kind of the 2 tiers of litigation that we're currently engaged in. A lot of our work is actually spent at the state level protecting the status quo with legislation. We've had high-profile battles in Illinois, in New Jersey, in Virginia, some in Connecticut as well, where there were rumblings that new legislation was going to be introduced. And thankfully, it ended up not being introduced. It would have rolled back homeschool freedom. But we had intense battles this past year in both Illinois, New Jersey, and ongoing in New Jersey as well, and then in Virginia to protect homeschool freedom from basically legislators who want to roll back the clock when it comes to homeschool freedom.
There obviously has been a massive push, especially in red states, for school choice legislation, school voucher programs. And this is a hotly debated topic in the homeschool community. If not in the homeschool community, you might not totally even understand the level of which this is a hotly debated issue and has been for many, many years, even before it became an actualized reality anywhere. But it's happening. I mean, it is here, and I believe it is here to stay. Do you think that the legal landscape has changed at all with the widespread rollout of school voucher programs?
Well, I think the landscape has absolutely changed. We're no longer arguing and fighting to protect the right of homeschool families to just homeschool their children. Now the battle is, well, do you get support from the state or local government in order to do it? So it's certainly, Overton window has moved greatly towards freedom. Now, as you alluded to, there is a debate in the homeschool community of whether it's advisable to participate in education savings accounts, essentially to receive this money to fund homeschool programs. HSLDA is generally pretty cautious about this. Our president, Jim Mason, wrote an article. Our listeners can Google it. It's called The Civic Virtue of Private Home Education by HSLDA President Jim Mason. And he lays out some of the concerns of, it might start very favorable now, but what if future administrations, future governors, future superintendents of education or secretaries of education try and put regulation and red tape on homeschooling? Ultimately, particularly in a state like New Hampshire, where there's a robust education savings account and it's in the law already, it's really a parental rights issue. Parents have to kind of weigh the pros and cons. There is a little bit more regulation if you are participating in New Hampshire's scholarship program versus if you're an independent homeschooler. I'm grateful that parents have both options in New Hampshire. It's really a parental rights issue. They should look at it, kind of educate themselves. But certainly all of us as lovers of liberty, we need to be on high alert that there's no future strings attached to any government money that would try and kind of roll back that hard fought and hard earned right of parents to be able to educate their children free from government entanglement.
The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And that's sort of where I've landed on this issue is that, it doesn't actually take having introduced education savings accounts to create regulation. They could create regulation on homeschooling tomorrow if there was the political will to do so. So one does not necessarily create a slippery slope, although I do think that there is a little bit more justification for government to add regulation if they're controlling purse strings. That's when I think it's very important that and I don't know if other states are set up the way that we're set up, but we have a very clear separation as far as these are children who are on we call them education freedom accounts. These are education freedom account students. These are scholarship students, and then which is actually something slightly different. And then these are homeschoolers who are completely unfunded. And I think, as long as you maintain very different legal paths and different legal statutes that govern those, I think that there is some built-in protection. And then, yes, it does become not only, yes, you want to be in there, you want to be advocating for your rights regardless. I mean, I have gone in there and lobbied against regulations on education freedom accounts, and I will continue to do so. But always, you always have to be aware that is a possibility, but as long as there is another option, right? There should always be another option. And so that's sort of where I personally landed on this. Now, speaking of New Hampshire, I hear you're coming here soon. And
I'm coming up on the 29th, actually.
Fantastic. And we have some exciting legislation planned that some of which I've been helping with. And we are introducing a constitutional amendment enshrining parental rights to educate your child. And my hope with that is that it will serve as an extra, if it were to pass, which I actually think if we could get it to ballot, the constitutional process in New Hampshire is it needs 3/5 of both chambers, and then it goes to ballot and has to get 60% at ballot. I believe it would get 60% at ballot without a problem. It's a matter of, can we get the 3/5 in both chambers to move it forward? But I think it would create really great extra layer of protection to homeschooling statutes and maybe ease some of the fears of homeschoolers moving forward. And so I'm very hopeful about it. I'm pretty excited about the language, and I think it's certainly it's a great political message. I mean, anybody who votes against something that just says a parent or legal guardian has the right to direct the education of their child is I mean, voters should know if somebody doesn't agree with that, because I think most people do agree with that, actually.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Melissa. HSLDA strongly supports the proposed parental rights amendment in New Hampshire. I would add, you guys, I know live free or die is your motto, but you better hurry because Texas already has passed their proposed parental rights amendment to the Constitution, Texas Constitution. That would be the first state in the nation. No state has ever enshrined parental rights in the text of their state constitution. And so it's going to the voters this November, actually, in Texas. So let's see if New Hampshire or Texas is going to get there first with protecting parental rights. One interesting thing is I occasionally will hear fellow lovers of liberty get all worried about a parental rights amendment to a state constitution or propose, for example, parental rights amendment to the federal constitution. And I always tell them, I'm like, this is exactly the same argument that Patrick Henry had against the Bill of Rights. Remember, that was the debate when our founding fathers were discussing the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And I always tell them, aren't you glad we have the First Amendment protecting religious freedom and free speech? Aren't you glad we have the Second Amendment protecting the right to keep and bear arms, and the Fourth Amendment? Imagine if we didn't have those. And they'll kind of pause and be like, oh, I kind of see your point. So it's simply putting in the text of the New Hampshire Constitution what the courts have already said, what we know, going back to the dawn of millennia, that these rights, we are endowed with them by our Creator, but it protects us. It helps us, exactly as you said, when lawyers like myself or legislators like you and advocates of liberty are defending parental rights. It helps us making these legal arguments. So I really am hoping that this parental rights amendment passes in New Hampshire. Again, the race is on. We'll see if Texas gets it first, or New Hampshire is second, or if New Hampshire can become the first to do it.
Yeah, we will see. It should be interesting. I'm excited for that one. I'm also excited we're going to have a bill moving forward to completely deregulate homeschooling. And I actually think that one has a pretty clear path to the end zone. Currently,
Wyoming just did that. So there used to be 11 states in the nation where you don't have to, for lack of a better term, check in with the government or get permission from the government before you homeschool your children. Most of those, they're kind of like Illinois, for example, dates back to 1950, their landmark case legalizing homeschooling. But Wyoming, just this past year, became the 12th state to eliminate any requirement that homeschoolers check in with the government, but they became the first state to do it by legislation. And New Hampshire is a great homeschool law. I love how you. Go on. Sorry.
I just want to check in with you there. The other ones were all based off of court cases, not legislation.
Correct. So New Jersey, Texas, Illinois, all of these, some of them, dating back decades of court cases, and then there really was never legislation or regulation. And so it's just kind of, well, we've always had homeschool freedom. Wyoming was very similar to New Hampshire. There was an annual notice of intent you had to send in to the local school district, and we got rid of that. A bill went through, it sailed through the legislature, and so there are now 12 states where there's, of course, there are education neglect laws, there are compulsory attendance laws. You still have to educate your children, but you don't have to file with the school district. So HSLDA would strongly support that in New Hampshire as well. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, we have a couple of requirements left. So it's a one-time check-in. Like, you only have to file it once
with your participating agency, and you could technically do that with a private school.
I can do it. I do it with a participating agency. So technically, I think the government is completely unaware that I have a child. So that's great. But so it's a one-time thing. You're supposed to keep a portfolio and do an end-of-year evaluation, none of which have to be reported to the government. You only have to keep them for your own records in case you are accused of education neglect. But this bill is to eliminate any of those requirements and the one-time notice requirement as well. So I think it has a very good chance of passing. I feel really, really positive about that one. And I'll, be gathering my homeschoolers to go off and advocate for that.
And we'll be right there with you. And, sometimes I get people saying, well, what's so wrong of doing that? You're already keeping records. What's so bad with keeping those records, having it mandated in state law, or filing that one-time notice? And I'll always say it goes back to where our rights come from. If our rights come from the government, then yeah, maybe you should check in with the government. but the government can take away those rights. But if our rights come from the creator, from nature, from, as our founders said, the laws of nature and nature's God, we're endowed by our creator with certain inalienable rights, then who is the government to say you need to file even just a one-time notice to let us know what's going on? These rights are pre-political, and that's why it really comes down to a fundamental question: where do our rights come from? And if you believe, as I do, that they don't come from the government, then there's really no requirement we check in with the government. Obviously, nobody's talking about getting rid of education neglect laws or compulsory attendance laws. So you still have to educate your children. We always tell HSLDA members, keep records for yourself. But yeah, we don't need to have these in the law or be checking in with a participating agency. So I think this is common sense change in the law.
I completely agree. I'm very excited about next legislative season, and I thank you so much for your work with HSLDA. They do such great work, and we're so glad that to have you in the fight with us up here in New Hampshire.
Well, I'm grateful, Melissa. Thank you for all that you're doing, and thank you for having me on.
Have a good night. Before, actually, tell people how they can find HSLDA.
Oh, yeah. So we're all over the internet and the socials. So hslda.org is our webpage, Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And then you can find us on X, on Facebook, on Instagram as HSLDA at all of those as well.
Okay, perfect. Have a great night.
Thank you, Melissa.
Bye. That's it for the Liberty Lobbyists. You can find me on X at Melissa Blasek NH or at Rebuild NH. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can always email me, director@rebuildnh.com. Until next time.